All right, well, good morning. It's good to see everybody here on Memorial Day weekend. Some of you might just be rolling in from the lake and heading right back to the lake, so that's okay. I get that. Remember I said everybody's up the lake, down the beach, up and down all summer. All right. Hey, before I go any further, though, I'd like to do something. And so if you'll just pay attention to me really quick, I would like for, if you are currently serving in the military, if you have served in the military in the past, or if you have an immediate family member who is currently serving in the military but not here this morning, would you please stand? Just right now, just go ahead and stand up right where you are. Don't be ashamed. Right there. Come on. Don't be afraid. Right there. Because we just want to say thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And we appreciate you very much. And on this day, we want to remember those who serve us now, who have served us in the past. And I spent yesterday watching for a long time, maybe you did too, this documentary on the History Channel about World War II. And, you know, the movies that we've done based on wars do nothing and are nothing compared to the actual footage of what happened during the war. It's much worse to watch that footage. And as I watch it, and as I think about Becky and I's family members who served in the military, I'm reminded that there are people who don't even know me, who have never known me, yet who went and sacrificed their life for me and for my freedom, so that I can enjoy the lifestyle that I have, so that I can have freedom of religion, and that I can stand up here and preach today to you without fear. And that's very honorable, and that's something unique and special that people have done. And I think about Jesus' own words when he said, "Greater love has no one than they lay down their life for their friend." And I don't think he was thinking specifically the context I'm in, but I know that he was speaking generally about anybody who should lay down their life for their friend, and what an honorable and noble thing that is to do. And so today we are very grateful for those who are serving or have served, or those who have loved ones who are serving. Now, I know that while many veterans who served in the armed forces or who served in a wartime situation, many of those did not choose to go because they were drafted. They were in a draft situation here. But of those who were drafted, I think many would say, even though I was drafted and didn't have a choice, I went because I wanted to serve my country as well. And I was happy to do that. And then there are those who have just straight up chosen, you know. All those who serve us today in Afghanistan and other places around the world that are very dangerous, this is a volunteer army, right? And they said, yes, I want to go and I want to sign up. And they did that because they want to serve their country, because they want to serve their people, because they have a particular belief system, a value system that is important, and they feel like it's worth defending and providing that freedom and spreading a sense of democracy. So that's a choice that somebody makes. And today we're going to talk a little bit about choices. And you know, really, every single one of us in here, we realize that life is about choices, isn't it? And in many ways, I think we could say that we are right here, right now, the sum total of the choices that we've made throughout our life. Would you agree with me on that? Like, we have made choices along the way to choose particular paths or a particular way, and all of that, and it's led us to who we are today. And sometimes these choices are made over a long period of time where we've prayed about it, talked about it to death, and then we make the choice. Sometimes it just happens in a minute. It just happens in a moment, you know, where we have it right in front of us and we have to make a decision. And while certainly those big choices, you know, the ones to move or to take a job or to marry somebody, you know, those are big ones, but also those small ones that we make in that minute add up to who we are and what we're all about. I was reading this past week this little article, and it was talking about the power of a minute, what can happen in a minute. And it said this: a minute is a funny amount of time. It's long enough to notice, but it's too short to do much of anything with. There are only about 500,000 of them in a year, but when you add all of humanity together, a lot starts to happen in that lowly minute. So consider what will happen in the next minute. 25 Americans will get a passport. 58 airplanes will take off around the world. 116 people will get married. 144 people will move to a new home. 11,319 packages will be delivered by UPS, and I really don't know what FedEx does. So anyway, don't if you're FedEx, don't worry about it. Here you go. 243,000 photos will be uploaded to Facebook. Now that's just information you need to know. 5,441,400 pounds of garbage will be created. So there you go with that. 7,150,000,000 human hearts will beat. And they will beat at, I have to get all these numbers right, 500.5 billion times as their bodies create 858, I don't even know what this number is, quadrillion new red blood cells. Is quadrillion an actual number, math people? Anyway, you can help me with that later. Yeah, okay. So anyway, my point is, a lot happens in a minute. And here's another thing. In the next minute, somebody will make a choice that will change their life forever. Someone around the world will make a choice that will change their life forever. And so really a lot can happen in a minute. And the choices that we make, even in that amount of time, can make a difference about how we move forward and what we do with our life. And choices are so important. And parents, you know what I'm talking about. Don't we talk to our kids all the time about choices? Making good choices. We teach them that from a young age because we already have done that, and we sometimes didn't choose wisely, did we? And we don't want them to do that. We want them to do better. And so we know the power of that. So I want to talk about that in light of someone that we started talking about last week, and that was Moses. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be back into Hebrews chapter 11. You can go ahead and turn there. Looking at verses 24 through 26 in this series, By Faith. And to set up these verses this morning, just a reminder, last week we looked at Moses being put into a basket and being placed at the edge of the Nile River in hopes that he would be picked up and saved because Pharaoh had decided to kill all the male children. And so Moses' parents were faced with a decision: if we keep him, he dies. We can take a chance and put him in the river and hope that somebody from possibly Pharaoh's household will pick him up. And so that's we talked a little bit about last week, the courage and faith of his parents. So this morning we're going to continue to pick up that story where that left off. So let me just read this in Hebrews 11, and then we'll come back on the other side and talk about the story of Moses. So it says, By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. Now, real quick, I wanted that verse 26, he regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ. You might think, wait a minute, if I got my timeline right, Christ was way after Moses. How would he even know to talk about Christ? This is a commentary, basically by the writer of Hebrews in this moment to make it relevant to the readers today, talking about this issue of following Christ and what that would mean. So just know that that's what that's about, a commentary made by the writer. But anyway, so to understand this whole idea of Moses choosing this particular way of life, we go back and we remember the story of Moses, and we're not going to read all the way through that. You can read it from Exodus 2 on and several chapters ahead of that. But basically, here's what happened. Pharaoh's daughter picks up Moses in that basket by the Nile River. And he is raised in Pharaoh's household. He is raised in the lap of luxury and wealth and privilege and everything that would go into being a part of Pharaoh's household. And so that's the way that he's raised up. One day, as he's grown older, he's out in the fields. He's watching his own people, the Hebrews, making bricks, and they're being slaves essentially to the Egyptians. And one day, he watches an Egyptian slave master essentially kill one of the Hebrew slaves. And that did something to Moses. Moses knew that these were his people. And on that day, something just sort of snapped. Something broke in him. And he had a choice to make. And so in the heat of the moment, he looks around to see if anybody's watching, and he goes and he kills the Egyptian. Now, this would set him on a course that would forever change his life. And even though killing the Egyptian was not a part of God's plan, he was like, okay, we'll have to go with that. So he thinks he's gotten away with this. The next day, he sees two Hebrews fighting with each other. He goes and he confronts them and says, why would you fight against each other? You're the same people. Why would you do that? And they go, who do you think you are? Are you over us? Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? And he was like, oh, wait a minute. How do you know about that? And because they knew about it, then Pharaoh found out about it. Pharaoh got very angry, decided to hunt Moses down and try to kill him. So Moses flees Egypt and lands in Midian. Spends most of the rest of his life there. He becomes a shepherd. Lives a very different life than he had lived in Egypt for sure. One day, he comes to a bush that is burning but not being consumed. And of course, we know this as his burning bush moment. God is speaking to him out of the bush, which happens all the time. Oh, burning bush, not being consumed, God speaking to me. Sure, this is good. He says, Moses, take off your shoes. You're on holy ground. I need to speak to you. And so he begins to tell Moses about his people back in Egypt and how they're crying out to be freed. And God has heard their cry and had compassion on them, and he has decided to free them. And then he begins to tell Moses, and by the way, you're the man. You're going to go back to Egypt, and you're going to free them, and I'm going to help you. And then Moses, who is the master of excuses, starts listing all the reasons why he shouldn't do that. Are you sure I'm supposed to do that? How are they going to know it's God? And when I don't speak very well, it's kind of like parents, when you ask your child to clean their room or take out the trash or anything related to that. I mean, maybe this just happens in my house, but every now and again I get the, oh, really? Do I have to pick up everything on the floor? Like all the toys and underwear and shoes and socks? And make my bed? Are you kidding me? I mean, it's like, oh, the pain and struggle, first world problems. But anyway, and then it's this whole thing of, I don't know, do I have to do that? Anyway, Moses was in that mode right then. All the reasons why I don't need to go back and talk to Pharaoh. But eventually, at the end of this conversation, God said, look, you're the guy. And Moses had to make a choice. Am I going to forget about this and just keep living my life as a shepherd and doing my thing? Or am I going to think about what God is calling me to do and go back to my people who are suffering and struggling and who need to be freed and do the right thing? And of course, in the end, we know that Moses chooses God's way. And he does. He goes back to Egypt, back to his people, back to suffering. And he begins to plead with Pharaoh to let his people go. And then we know about all the plagues and all those things that happened. Now, see, here's the thing. Along the way, somewhere either in this time when he goes back to Pharaoh's life, which, by the way, is not the same Pharaoh that was there when he left, but then, or even before then, when he was a shepherd, he had opportunities to go back to Egypt and to beg for forgiveness, mostly probably from Pharaoh's daughter, his mother, who had raised him in that household, and say, would you let me back? And more than likely, she would have let him back and gone to the Pharaoh and pled on his behalf. He could have gone back and chosen that lifestyle. That was possible, but he doesn't. He realizes that his God, the God of his people, has a plan and a will. And there's something in this that he has got to choose. And so he chooses God in that moment and gives up so many things to do that. The luxury and the riches and the wealth and the life of ease and the power and the prestige and everything that went with living in Pharaoh's household. Now, what is happening here with Moses and his life as we kind of pull back and look at the broad scope of what he has done, the choices that he has made? We begin to think about our own life even today, because what happened to him has been happening ever since then and is still happening today. And it's the whole idea of not choosing the way of the world to choose the way of God. It's like there is this way that is right and there is this way that is not. And it's interesting because even back in the New Testament, the Christians, right after Christ had gone back to heaven and left them there, and they began to form this Christian community, they were known by people outside of them as the way. Literally, they were called people of the way. And what that meant was that these people, these Christians, they have chosen a different way. They have chosen the way of Christ, which is often the way of suffering. And it's a very different way than the world. And you can find that in Acts 9 and 11. And they had chosen this person, Jesus, because he had differentiated himself from every other leader, even all the way back into Moses and Abraham to David, any religious leader of the day, any prophet. He had differentiated himself in this way that all of them were pointing forward to something else. Jesus was the only one that pointed to himself. He was the only one who was saying, look, I'm not pointing to something else. I'm pointing to me. And this guy named John Stott, who wrote a book called Basic Christianity, says it like this. He says, Jesus was not just another signpost, but the destination to which the signposts had led. And you remember Jesus himself even said this, I am the what? The way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That was unique and different from any other prophet or religious leader. And even today, look at all the religions, nobody does that, but Jesus says, I am the only way to the Father. And so in order for us to continue to follow the way, this way of Christ, and to understand that, there are many choices that will be made along that path. Would you agree with me on that? There are many choices that are made along the path to continue to follow the way. So I want to talk about some of those in light of Moses' journey, in light of what Jesus has said about this way. What are some choices that we make? So here we go. Number one. First of all, we choose God over me. We choose God over ourselves. And sometimes this can be the hardest choice that we make, right? I mean, it's like oftentimes we're looking out for number one. And when Moses was standing at the burning bush and God had presented this task to him, this calling, he began to think about all the reasons why he couldn't do it. It's all about me. I can't do this. And then finally he had to come to the point and realize, you know what? This isn't about me. This is about something that God is trying to do here. And he's calling me to be a part of that. And sometimes we're our worst enemies, aren't we? We're our biggest problem. We're the biggest stumbling block because we make it all about us. And every time I think about this whole conversation of selfishness and making everything about me, I just can't help it. I always think about Toby Keith, country music artist. If you love country music, you know him. If you don't, then disregard. But he has this song where he talks about this thing about it being all about him, but it's actually a thing between him and his girlfriend and how she's always making everything about herself. And he just kind of wants to break into that conversation. Here's the lyrics of this. He says, we talk about your work, how your boss is a jerk. We talk about your church and your head when it hurts. We talk about your friends and the places that you've been. We talk about your skin and the dimples on your chin, the polish on your toes and the run in your hose. And we're going to talk about your clothes. And talking about you makes me smile. But every once in a while, come on. I want to talk about me, want to talk about mine, want to talk about mine, and then, oh, me, my, I want to talk about me. You liked that singing, didn't you? They never let me sing. I mean, it's like, man, I got skills, country music skills. I got them all. But there is something wrong with every party in this song, isn't there? Because she just wants to talk about herself. It's all about her. And he's like, well, you know what? I just want to talk about me. Now, is this not some of the biggest problems in every relationship? Is that if we start to get all about ourselves and we don't care about the other person, I just want this to be about me and I want you to live in my world. And, it's like, after a while, that relationship breaks down. Because we've forgotten this thing called what? Compromise. Because a true relationship is one where, you know what? I'm going to give up something to gain you. Because that's how this is supposed to work. And it's the same thing in our relationship with God. You know what? I choose to give up something. I choose to give up this me that just keeps sin in my world and, keeps all about me. And I give that up because I choose you. Because I know that you're better than me. You are my life, my salvation, my hope. And I need you. And God calls us to that, to give up ourselves. And sometimes he calls us to give up ourselves for the sake of another person, for the sake of helping others, that we give up our comfort and our ease. And man, that has never been brought to light more than what happened in South Korea when that ferry capsized. You've heard about that. It's all been all in the news and everything else. Some interesting stories have come out of that tragic situation. And one is the fact that while thousands of people or however many people were on that boat were about to die as it was sinking, you know what the captain was doing? He was in a lifeboat. He was getting out of there. He was thinking about himself. And in the news reports, this one guy said it wasn't just the captain. He said it was chaotic because everyone was just busy saving themselves and many people weren't pulling up the people below. People were just saying, I'm just getting the heck out of here. Forget about you. Save myself. Now, while that seemed to be the majority of the case in this tragedy, there were some shining moments, and one was this 16-year-old boy named Park, who was in a line of people, and they were going to the side of the boat where hopefully they wouldn't drown. And so he was on his way to safety with other people when he sees this 6-year-old girl by herself on the side of the boat that was about to go under. And she'd gotten separated from her parents who were looking for help. And he stopped, and he looked at her, and he had compassion on this little girl. And he leaves this trail of people, and he goes down, and he risks his own life, and he scoops up the girl and brings her back up the side of the ship and takes her to safety. That was an awesome story. You got the captain of the ship who says, I'm in it for me, and you got the 16-year-old kid who says, you know what, somebody else needs help. And I think about the words of Jesus in Matthew 16 when he said this to his disciples, his followers, as he's saying it to us today. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? So you see this choice where we choose God. We choose Christ over us. And we give away our life to gain life is a basic principle of what it means to be a follower of the way. And then there's this other thing that's very closely related to it called choosing God over sin. And I know that selfishness is sin in many ways, but there are also other sins that we have to deal with every day, don't we? There's sins that sit at our doorstep waiting to creep into our life. And you know, it says in that passage in Hebrews that Moses chose to not indulge the pleasures of wealth and luxury by going back to his former life, but he chooses God, and he chooses this way of suffering back with his people because God had a better plan for him. And you know, for us, it's the same process in life of saying, you know, I don't choose that way of the world and that way of sin. And you know, the definition of sin, we talk about it, is that missing the mark, that archer term, where I'm shooting at a target and there's a bullseye and I shoot, and when I miss that mark, I sin. But you know what's interesting? You can think about it a different way. That in many ways, it's not that we were shooting for God and we missed him. It's that we were shooting at another target. We were actually aiming for something else, something not God. And that's why we missed it. That's really how that works. Is when we're aiming at things that have nothing to do with God. And then sin becomes a part of the equation for us. And we have to be careful with those choices, right? Do you know this is going to be all about music this morning, I guess, but do you know the pop superstar Katy Perry? You know who I'm talking about? There's like a generation of us that are glazing over. We don't know who that is, but there is a generation here who knows very much who that is. And she has made like all kinds of just amazing money and records in the industry. 11 Grammy nominations, 2 American Music Awards, 4 MTV Video Music Awards, 14 People's Choice Awards, 3 Guinness World Records. I'm not even sure what for. She has a net worth of $80 million. I mean, she's got it all going on. She is doing what every pop star wants to do in their career. But you remember, what she's doing is very secular in the music that she sings. And I am in no way judging Katy Perry up here. I'm not doing that. But you need to know something interesting about her life is that when she was younger, she was raised by Christian parents who very much worked hard to instill their faith in her life. And she actually grew up singing gospel music for a long time. And there was a period in her life when she actually wanted to become more, you know, Amy Grant, a Christian artist who sang, it's been a while since she was actually on the scene, but anyway, she wanted to be Amy Grant. And here's a quote on a YouTube video where she was being interviewed. Here's what Katy said about this moment in her life. She said this: I wanted to be like the Amy Grant of music in the Christian world, but it didn't work out. Here we go. So I sold my soul to the devil. She said that. By her own admission. She was like, I had this opportunity before me. I could have gone this way or I could have gone that way. And somebody from a record label came and said, I can make sure that you make lots of money, that you make lots of records, and that you become really well known if you'll just sign it over. And she did. That was a choice that she made. And I'm reminded of what David said in the Psalms when he said, blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. And you see, that last part is so important. You know, when we walk in the way of God, he plants us. We are planted by this river that nourishes our roots and allows our roots to grow deep. And because our roots are growing deep, we bear this amazing fruit. And it says everything that we do, in other words, everything that we do for God prospers. When we serve him and choose his kingdom, it grows and we prosper because of that. But the other way, this way of the wicked, we can surmise that it's actually like being planted somewhere in dry ground where the roots don't grow and where we produce a shriveled up fruit, and we call that good. We choose this way of the world and we think it's so great, but it's actually shriveled up and it means nothing. And there are these points along the journey where we have opportunities, really even every day, to choose God over the sin that's presented in our life so that we can hit the mark. And then there's this last thing. Again, very much related to the previous two, but choosing to become less. This is very hard for people in this day and age and in this very individualistic culture that we live in, where marketing and advertising says, no, you need to be more. You need to look good. You need to be in shape. You know, you need the ab sizer, butt buster, and this kind of makeup when you finally get that good looking and all this kind of, you need to be more because it's all about you. Back to that song. You know, this world just makes it so much about you. But in the gospel, we read that really it was all about not becoming more, it was about becoming actually less. And I think about that event where Jesus comes on the scene and John the Baptist, you know, the forerunner to Jesus, has already come, and he's got disciples that he's bringing to himself, and he's baptizing these disciples. Jesus comes on the scene like across the river, and people start going to Jesus and being baptized. And John's disciples, man, they get all mad and upset, and they're very competitive, I guess, and they see Jesus, and he's baptizing all these people, so they come back to John and say, John, look at that guy. That Jesus guy, he's baptizing a lot of people, maybe even more than you are. How do you feel about that? And John was like, oh man, you don't get it, do you? He said, let me give you an example of how this is going to go. Let's think about a wedding, he says. And let's think about the groom and the best man. Those are not the terms that he uses. I'm just putting in our terms. He says, think about the groom and the best man. He said, the best man is there to do what? To support the groom, to serve him and to help him. And on the day of the wedding, he runs around and he makes sure that everybody's boutonnieres on and he's got all the waters ready for him. And you okay? You need anything? Can I get you something to eat? You know, that's the best man's job, is to help serve the groom. And then when the wedding starts, the best man just sort of fades off into the background and he says, this is the guy. The groom is the guy and the bride. This is what we're here for. And he says to his disciples, you see, that's the way it is right now with us. I'm just the best man. I'm just here to point over to that guy and say, he's the man. He's the groom. He's the one you want to look at. Stop looking at me. And in John 3:3, he makes this amazing statement. He says, he must become greater, and I must become what? Less. It was a statement that was for all his disciples, including us today, to think about. That as we live our life, over time, because I know this doesn't happen all in one sweeping moment, it's a process where every day we're making a choice to give more of our life over to God and to make this life less about us and more about Christ. And like John, we point the way to him and we go, don't look at me. I'm just serving. I'm doing what he's calling me to do, but I don't want you to see me. I want you to see Christ. Because at the end of the day, he's the one who brings life and hope and help. Now, really this morning, I think about the fact that even this morning we're faced with a challenge, aren't we? To do these things that I've just talked about, to make more of God than us, to choose God over sin, to really diminish our life in a way, make it more about Christ. And I wonder, how will we handle this challenge this week? How will we take this on this week, and what kind of prayers will we pray that reveal our true heart about how we feel about God becoming greater in our life? And you know, we're only given this one life, and there's only so much time to live it, right? Paul says in Ephesians 5, he says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Be wise. Be wise in how you live your life every day. Amen? Let's pray. Well, Father, this morning we are here because we made a choice to be here. We are drawn here because you have done something in us, in our heart and in our mind. We have seen that you are good. You have proven yourself to us. You have become our provider, our sustainer. We know that our hope is wrapped up in you. And we've come to say thank you for that. And yet, Lord, when we leave this place and we go out into our jobs and our life and everything that we do, there are choices still to be made. And we need your help to do that well. We need your strength, and we need to be reminded that you are greater and better than this world. And we also need to be reminded that it may be hard and there may be suffering along the way, along the path, but that's okay. It will all be redeemed by you. So God, we thank you for Moses, who went ahead of us and showed us the way. We thank you for Christ, who went ahead of us and showed us the way, for those disciples who gave up their life to be a follower. And so, God, today we just say thank you for the privilege of serving in any way that it comes, the good, the difficult, because we know that it all points the way to you. So, God, help us to make it less about us and more about you every day, to find ways to make that real in our relationships and at work and with our friends and everything that we do. God, we say thank you that you provided a path for us that is good through Jesus Christ. And today we worship you and put you at the highest place for that. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, well, we're going to